Hello Orchid friends, how are you? Welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time watching my video, my channel is all about orchids. From what orchids I have, how I grow them, my thoughts on certain orchid topics, to what orchids in my collection are blooming, etc. So if you want to follow along my orchid hobby adventure, please consider subscribing to my channel and turn on the notification. Today in this video, we're going to look at one of the two bigger mini marks in my collection. I have a total of 5, and this one is one of the bigger ones. So in this video, we'll take a look at how it developed, how it did, as well as answer some questions around semi-hydroponics as the method, as this orchid is also grown in that method. So if we go back in time, toward end of 2019, end of December 2019, it was starting to put out a tiny little spike. It was also kind of growing roots, and it wasn't quite active growth, but it was doing something. But primarily it was the spike that was shooting out. Here is just to give you a quick view of how the root system was at the time, and it was doing really well. As you can see, some of the roots are long enough to reach the reservoir areas and even toward the very bottom of the cup. So that is, to me, the best case scenario for a semi-hydro orchid. And this is a side-by-side comparison amongst the two bigger mini marks in my collection. And toward the end of the video, I think I have another short video clip of these two being side by side. But back to this mini mark. So unfortunately, mini mark does not have a super strong fragrance. It does have a little bit of fragrance, but I remember last year in 2019 when all 5 of them were in full bloom, and because they were all together, when I walked by them, I was able to easily detect the fragrance. But individually though, you kind of have to put your nose up against the flower to really smell something. And the smell, I would describe, it's kind of like, citrusy and on the sour side. So every time I smell it, it reminds me of the plum juice or plum wine. So it's kind of interesting. But the reason I love mini mark is not for its fragrance. It's really for its color combination, the white and orange and a little bit of pink. The white is not the pasty white flower background. It's that milky white, which I love. And I don't know, for some reason, this whole orange lip thing just do it for me. But it's just a pity that mini mark is not a widely common orchid to be found. I had to order these through a very specialty orchid grower from Taiwan. So I rarely seen mini mark being sold at a grocery store or any kind of regular garden center. I saw a post on Facebook somewhere saying that somebody got a hold of a mini mark from a local garden center. But in my areas, even when I was living in New York, no, I've never seen mini mark available in one of those regular regular store. Okay, back to semi-hydro. This orchid in semi-hydro, I repotted this orchid maybe 2 years ago, and one of the biggest benefit is because the pebbles don't degrade, don't break down over time. It's in organic media, so unless there is root issues or pest issues, or the orchid is outgrowing the pot, otherwise I really can just leave it be for as long as I want, because as long as the roots are doing well in there, you really don't have any good reason to repot it other than this orchid is getting too big. Now, because this orchid has roots at the bottom, so I don't always fill up the water to the drainage hole height. I now typically would do maybe quarter cup. That's what I usually give the amount that I give to this orchid, quarter cup, and then the fertilizer would be added to the solution, and it's also quarter strength. Now, this orchid is still relatively young. When I first got it, they were just first blooming size. They were so tiny. I think the leaf span were maybe about 3 inches, and now they've gotten so much bigger. And I think it's still relatively young because I've seen some photos of mini marks online, and they have much longer spikes and with many more blooms. So I think this one is just still young, so that, it's not capable of producing a much longer spike with more buds. But hopefully with the right care and with age, it will be able to do that in the future. Coming up is a extra segment of this video, what I call the bonus footage segment. And this is something I start to do in my channel for my videos starting this year, and just to give you some extra footage to show you the comparison of certain orchids. And in this case, we're gonna have my other bigger mini mark having full bloom, both of them side by side, and just to give you a sense of what they look like. And this is just the 2 of 5 that I have. When the other ones are in full bloom, when I put them together, they produce quite a, mini show. It's not a big show, but a mini show. Last year, I also took some photos of them being in full bloom together, and it was actually really interesting. I mean, just with all these dots and all these orange lips, with white, it's just very cute. Now, I want to answer a couple questions I got recently, and specifically for semi-hydro questions. So, for example, these ones are in semi-hydro. They're potted in a mixture of hydrocoin and manto clay. They're both in organic media. So the question is, when do I decide, or how do I decide on the ratio of bigger versus smaller pebbles? And the rule of thumb that I usually go by is, if the roots of your orchid are thicker, you probably want to use a little bit more of the bigger pebble. And if the roots are medium or too skinny or very skinny, you may want to have slightly more smaller pebble. And if you are in doubt, I think a 1-to-1 ratio is a good starting point. But it's gonna take a bit of trial and error, because it also depends on the size of the container you use. I can't just tell you a ratio, because you may be using a really big container, and that would also not make the 1-to-1 ratio work, or 2-to-1. So you kind of have to consider other factor also, right? How humid is your environment, and how well ventilated is your growing condition, your growing environment, all of that. But I think 1-to-1 is a good starting point for most of my orchids, because they are slightly bigger than these mini marks. So the ratio for the bigger pebbles would be higher. So maybe it's like 1.5-to-1 or 2-to-1. So these are just some of the rules that I apply when I decide on the ratio. And after a while, you're gonna know for certain cup size and for certain orchid size and root size, the thickness, you would know. You may eventually get to a point where you don't even need to measure. You just kind of have a feel for what kind of ratio may be right, depending on how what you see at that moment. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. That's how we learn. I mean, with my orchid journey, I've made some mistakes, plenty of mistakes before, and eventually I come up with a system that works for me, for my orchids, and my growing condition. And I know you can do that too with time. But don't start with expensive orchid when you experiment. Always start with cheap ones so you can sleep at night. This is all I have for you today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you would like to get more orchid related videos from my channel, please subscribe and turn on the notification. I want to wish you happy growing, and I will talk to you in my next video. Ciao!